Auston Matthews could return tonight for a date against the Panthers. We'll tee up that game and talk a little bit about this Crosby to Toronto trade chatter that's picking up. We'll get into all that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Many wagers can be placed over on FanDuel tonight as the Toronto Maple Leafs travel down to South Beach to take on the Florida Panthers, the defending Cup champs. It's the first battle between these two teams this year. A couple of fierce, spirited battles over the course of the last couple of seasons, but this is the first one this year. You ready for it, Dave?
Oh yeah. I mean, considering how few games the Leafs have played, it's like you get so many days to even just prepare and like just truly understanding how important this game is for the Leafs. And like I understand, like, it's November. I know it's early in the season, but like this is kind of an important game for the team.
Oh, for sure. I mean, any game against Florida is going to be important, right? If you can pick up a full 2 points on them, like right now, that this is 1-2 in the Atlantic Division. Points percentage wise, it's different, but in terms of points, it's Toronto at 1, Florida at 2. So it's always going to be an important 2 points up for grabs. And then they've got Tampa the next night, the team that's on the heels of both of these clubs. So it's an important road trip for the Maple Leafs to try and just establish and kind of further their lead in the Atlantic Division a little further. They've played some excellent hockey of late and could be getting some reinforcements back in this game. Auston Matthews on the precipice of his return after missing the last 8 games with an unknown injury, I guess we could call it right now. There's plenty of speculation as to what the injury could have been, but there's a good chance he could play in this game tonight. If not tonight, then certainly he should be ready to go by Saturday against Tampa Bay. But hey, with Matthews being a game time decision, I know a lot of people are excited to see what this team can do, excited more so to see if Matthews can jump on this moving train, because they won 7 of the last 8 games with them out of the lineup. Like, I kind of want to see what it looks like now with him inserted back. Hopefully, he doesn't ruin the minutia of what's going on here.
Well, yeah, I know that's always the concern. It's almost like he comes back. Let's say they have a subpar performance. There's going to be a lot of people irrationally talking about Auston Matthews' impact on the lineup.
Yes.
Again, I use irrational very, very firmly, right?
Yeah.
You look at what they've been fortunate that they've had a very stretched out schedule, right? They've been very fortunate that they've had some decent teams that they've gone up against, Vegas being one of those teams. They haven't gone against a Florida yet without Auston Matthews. They haven't gone up against Tampa without Auston Matthews. Like, those are different challenges when you're going up against teams that are right up there in the standings, right?
Well, I would disagree with that, actually. Washington would be the teams in the East, right? They beat Washington without Auston Matthews.
That took a little
prior
more
to the Ovi injury at that too.
Yeah, like that one took, but that one was like
Edmonton with McDavid in tow.
Yeah, Edmonton's
they've played a couple of solid games.
They've had a couple of solid teams. I would say like Vegas and Washington are like the 2 teams like that, like right up there. Like Edmonton hasn't been great this year. Now they're starting to pick it up, especially with McDavid back. But like, I think I know that Florida's
been so too, though. Yeah. Like, Florida's lost 4 in a row and 6 in the last 7 4 in a row and 6 of their last 7. So, like, the Florida
I guess
Panthers have not been the Florida
Tampa would
Panthers of
probably,
last year.
if anything, Tampa is probably going to be the hard. Like, let's say he doesn't come back against Tampa, which it doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like Tampa is like the sure bet that he comes back. Like, that's the hardest team that they've gone through. But yeah, no, like they have found. But the thing is, those games against like Edmonton and Washington, like that, those were grinded out games. Like they were, like they weren't decisive wins. And I think that's I think where you notice the impact of not having Auston Matthews, like how much better they would be if he had them in those games.
Well, this is going to be a grinded out game too, because that's how the Florida Panthers play hockey. They're going to scratch, claw, their way to 2 points. That's typically how they get it done. I mean, we watched them last year countless times, low scoring games, and they're able just to scratch and claw, play physical, and capitalize on a mistake and get some timely saves. That's really been the biggest difference, I would say, between Florida of last year and this year. Like, I think the team's doing okay. They just can't get a save here, Dave. I mean, I'm looking at their last 4 games that they've lost here. They've given up 4, 7, 3, 6. They shut out Winnipeg 5-0, but then before that, they gave up 6 and 4. So they've given up at least 4 goals in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the last 7 games. Like that's not a winning ways, and that certainly isn't Panther hockey either. Bobrovsky's really struggling right now. He's got an 885 save percentage on the year. So this isn't necessarily the Florida of last year, the Florida that the Maple Leafs played in the playoffs 2 years ago, or the Florida that beat the Edmonton Oilers in the Stanley Cup. It's still a good team. You certainly have to take them seriously. I'm not saying that at all, because they obviously can put it together, and Bob stand on his head. And with Toronto's luck with being goalie, this could be one of those games. It's a team that's looking to get off the schneid here. But I wouldn't look at it and say like this is the toughest task. They've had a lot of really tough tests over the course of the last couple of weeks here. I think this is just another one of those in the same category. If they continue to play their game, play solid defense, they continue to play in their own end, defend their asses off, play connected, and then you add the threat of Auston Matthews to it. I think that Toronto has a good chance to win this game. Despite coming in as I'm looking at it right now on FanDuel, they are technically the underdogs. I think it's at plus 110. I mean, Toronto to me, I think, I know they're on the road and they haven't been as good on the road as they have been at home, but the way that they're playing, I'd like Toronto in this one.
Well, Toronto, what they've done, I give them a lot of credit for, is if there's a team that's struggling, like they've added to those struggles, right? They don't have a team that's coming struggling. It's like, oh yeah, they should easily win it, and then they don't win the game. Like they have being team, like Boston is one, right? A struggling Boston team. They took care of them pretty easily.
4-0.
Right?
Yeah. Utah struggling. They beat Utah.
The only one really, like the only blip, like you look at this streak they've been on, the only blip on the radar was that Ottawa game.
And Ottawa outside of that game has been garbage.
Like I look at that game and it's like Ottawa did a lot of things really well because they treated that as their Stanley Cup, but it's also because the Leafs, they didn't look like the Leafs that night. It was clear. Anthony Stolarz didn't look like Anthony Stolarz. The blue line that did not look like the blue line that we've come to see. So they have certainly played in a way that they look upon teams that they should beat, and they're beating them. There's that mentality that wasn't there before.
Yeah,
right,
for sure.
So that's why you have to like their chances, but you also know that a game against Florida, you gotta always know that they see the Leafs as like, okay, we got to show up against this team, like a game for sure.
I also like the revenge narrative that a couple of Maple Leafs are going to have, right? You've got Anthony Stolarz likely to make the start, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, obviously, who spent last year in Florida, and then Steven Lorentz, who let Florida walk as a free agent, who signed here in Toronto. So, a couple of guys who are going to want to stick it to their former teams, especially Anthony Stolarz. So, should be an exciting game. Why don't we come back? We'll take a look at both lineups tonight and kind of do the head-to-head preview as well on the other side. And man, oh man, the rumor mill is running rampant, and Sidney Crosby's name is now being thrown around, and the Leafs potentially a suitor, Dave. We'll talk about that as well. Coming up next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Bilt Rewards. PSA for anyone who rents. If you haven't heard of Bilt, you're about to thank me. Earning points on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through Bilt. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points that you can use towards flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, and even your next rent payment. Let me break it down for you. There's no cost to join Bilt, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Bilt points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Bilt points towards. Points can also be redeemed towards a future rent payment and unique experiences that only Bilt members can access. So if you're not only earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points on your rent if you're already paying by going to joinbilt.com/lockedonnhl. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnhl. Make sure to use our URL so they know that we sent you. Joinbilt.com/lockedonnhl to start earning points on your rent payment today.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Gametime Picks curates and makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater events, whatever you're looking to get tickets to. You've got tremendous seat views that give you a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you even buy the tickets. And they've got the lowest price guarantee. Your Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, with new episodes. You can find them wherever you get a podcast and also up on YouTube. All right, Maple Leafs and Florida Panthers tango tonight down in South Beach, and the Maple Leafs currently number 1 in the Atlantic Division, the Florida Panthers number 2, but both teams going in opposite directions. Toronto's won 7 of their last 8. Florida has lost 6 of their last 7. So, all things point to Toronto being able to squeak out a win here if things continue the way that the trends have gone. But you know that the pesky Florida Panthers and Paul Maurice are definitely going to be bringing their best on home ice to try and down the Maple Leafs, as it'll be a valuable 2 points to the Florida Panthers tonight as well. Why don't we take a look at the game preview and the head-to-head matchup between these two teams and kind of see where things are at, and then afterwards we'll take a look at the lineup. But the Toronto Maple Leafs coming into tonight with a 13-6-2 record, Florida 12-9-1. And really, I think the one thing that sticks out to me about this matchup here, Dave, I'm looking at the Florida Panthers. I'm looking at goals against per game. They're allowing 3.45 goals against per game. That is not what you come to expect out of the Florida Panthers. And an .885 save percentage from Sergei Bobrovsky is a big reason for it. And that, to me, is something that the Leafs will have to try and exploit tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's really it, right? You look at their run the last few years, right? The 2 Stanley Cup runs. Sergei Bobrovsky was playing lights out, right? He was back to that Vezina caliber form. And it's kind of interesting, as soon as they don't get the Vezina worthy goaltending, things have started to look, not so great for Florida. And look, like, this is also a team that's been gutted the last few years. Like, you even look at their blue line. Ulrich Larson gone. I know he wasn't like a top pairing guy, but that's a player that they lost. They lost Brandon Montour again, and one of those players that he had missed time with injury, but when he's in the lineup, he was always a good player for that team. Sure, they still have Forsling. Sure, they still have Ekblad. But like, you look at we've talked about it before with this team. It's like, who's on their third pairing? Like you look at, and we'll go through the lineup later, but you look at this team. It's like if they don't get the goaltending from Bobrovsky and even Spencer Knight, that's what gives them their problems, because the goaltending usually covers up their deficiencies in the lineup.
Right, exactly. And yeah, it's interesting because you don't expect to see it out of a Florida Panthers team, and the depth on the blue line is definitely withered away, right? Like Montour's gone, OEL's in Toronto now. Like you've just seen a lot of that depth get depleted, right? As you've mentioned. So Toronto guys to make sure that they take advantage and they continue to play that heavy hockey, continue to cycle it down low, and then work at the puck out in front and battle in front of the net. The high danger save percentage, I believe, has been also pretty darn low for this Florida Panthers team, just an 805 high danger save percentage, which is sitting in what is that bottom half of the league. Yeah, bottom half of the league for high danger save percentage as well. So, if Toronto can just continue to do what they've done, again, they should have some success here. They've got the better penalty kill. They're killing off 83.6% of their penalties. Florida, 81% of their penalties. But the Panthers have had a decent power play at 21.7% compared to Toronto's just 19.7%. However, Toronto's has been far better as of late, as we all know, their last 8-9 games. So, if you equate it to the last calendar month, I mean, Toronto's flat out been better, in that aspect too. So, again, all signs point to Toronto being the better team. It's just Florida, they can snap out of it at any minute. Let's take a look at the lineups of what we're going to be watching tonight, and they're projected lineups as of now because we still don't know what is going to happen with Auston Matthews. He did skate in practice yesterday. We talked about it on yesterday's podcast in detail if you want to go back and listen to that. But so as of now, we are projecting that he plays tonight. He will be a game time decision, but he's currently the second line center with Nylander, William Nylander, I should put that qualifier in there now, Dave, and Pontus Holmberg, because, the Leafs have loved what they've seen out of Tavares, Marner, and McMahon on both the offensive and defensive side of the puck, and they want to keep that trio together. So that's what the top six looks like: McMahon, Tavares, and Marner, and then Holmberg, Matthews, and Nylander. And the third line's going to be kind of a kid line. You got Robertson and Minton, and then Alex Nylander, who I guess isn't really a kid anymore, but Alex Nylander is on that line. And then Steven Lorentz, Connor Dewar, and Alex Steeves is going to round out the forward group, or at least that's what we saw in practice yesterday. Any comments there, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's interesting to see where things will change if Matthews not able to play. Obviously, Holmberg would likely move over to center there. Who would get the spawn? I try to remember who was on the second line.
Maybe Grabankin, like Robertson gets moved up to the second line, then Grabankin gets moved into that.
I know that Lorentz might get third line duties too. I think he was moved up, and then you had like a Grabankin, Steeves, Dewar.
Yeah,
that could be an option. Like, it'll be interesting to see like the quick flip flop. They would just probably revert to what they had the last game. Fortunately,
do you find it kind of interesting that Holmberg is given like the top 6 nod over Robertson?
Yeah, so they were talking about that actually a lot on Kipper's show, and from what I heard, like Craig Berube likes that Holmberg, when he doesn't have the puck,
he competes.
He's doing like the right things. He's also, he's doing good things with the puck in the offensive. Like the problem is he doesn't have any offensive touch right now. He's literally some people would say chances die on his stick, but he's doing those other things that I think Robertson's not doing, right? Robertson's purely a guy that's, going to try to score, but he's not like a play driver, really. He's not he's not doing those other things, I guess, that Holmberg's doing to make him worthy of that spot, which an interesting that was said is just like you got 7 regular forwards out of lineup and Nick Robertson still can't get a top 6 job.
That probably says enough. Says enough is enough. And, If he can find a taker for Robertson, I think it'd be best for both parties, especially as guys start to get healthy and they need roster spots. It's becoming increasingly obvious that the Maple Leafs just don't have much faith in Nick Robertson, and he's a pretty uh, expendable player at this point. He really is. And the fact that he's still sitting on just one goal on the year isn't helping his case either. So, yeah, that's pretty telling to where things are at right now for Nick Robertson. All right, let's take a look at the defense because we didn't break down the defense, but things are going to be status quo pretty much for the Maple Leafs there. McCabe and Tanev, Riley, Ekman Larson, and then Benoit and Timmins. And then Anthony Stolarz returns to Florida, and he will most likely get the start against his former team. So Stolarz, who's been off for like a week, haven't seen him play in a little bit with Woll getting back-to-back starts and not many games being played. Stolarz might be a little rusty going into this one, but he should be very much fueled by the revenge factor.
Yeah, you're hoping that being back in Florida, getting his ring and things like that will give him a little bit of a boost. Like, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to get Joseph Woll going because he's missing, making up for a bit of lost time. But also,
that and he got a shutout. I mean, you just reward the guy after.
He's been playing really well, so you're right in the hot hand. And Anthony Stolarz, as much as we've liked what we've seen from him, he's also a guy that has not played a starter's reps. Right? He hasn't played that. I'm trying to think of the right word for this, but like workload. He hasn't had a starter's workload, so like they're gonna, I think, be cautious about that. And I mean, Craig really kind of alluded to it. He's like, it's not like Stolarz hasn't had the energy. It's not like he's seen like a dip in his play because he's playing more. It's just you gotta. I think it's a matter of establishing Woll a little bit here too. He's played well. You're rewarding that, and Stolarz doesn't have to feel like he's taking too much of the workload too.
It's just going to be a second start in the last 2 weeks. Like his last start.
It's also the schedule hasn't a lot. Like
right. Yes. It's the schedule, of course. But I'm just saying, like Stolarz hasn't played a game since November 16th, and then his last game before that was November 12th. So between November 13th and November 27th, one start in that 2 week span, which is kind of crazy. Like he's making like his second start on day 14 of that 2 week span. But yeah, it's just kind of the way that the schedule is played out here in the back half of November, where it's been very spread out. And with Woll getting a shutout against Vegas, they go back to him again against Utah. And now they're like, okay, I guess it's time to go back to Stolarz, and he can get that revenge game against the Florida Panthers. And we'll see who ends up getting the start against Tampa Bay on Saturday. I guess it'll kind of depend on how well Stolarz plays at this point. So should be interesting in that regard. Okay, let's look at the Florida Panther. You know what? Let's take a break. We'll come back and look at the Florida Panthers lineup on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NHL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NHL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 of bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. I like Bobby McMahon to record 2+ shots on goal tonight. That's my best bet for the game. You can find that wager over on FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Network. The Locked On podcast, Locked On Leafs podcast continues. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. Leafs and Panthers for the first time this season going toe-to-toe tonight down in South Beach. And the Panthers not playing some good hockey as of late. They've lost 6 of their last 7 games. And the Maple Leafs on the complete opposite end. They've won 7 of their last 8 without Auston Matthews. But Matthews expected to return. I shouldn't say he's expected. There's a possibility he returns tonight. If not tonight, then he will return Saturday against Tampa. But there's we'll say it's a 50-50 shot as of right now. We'll see how he feels. It's a game time decision. The Florida Panthers, though, let's take a look at the lineup that the Leafs will be going up against. And obviously, Sasha Barkov leading the way as your first line center with Sam Reinhart and Rodriguez. You've got Verhaeghe with Bennett and Kachuk. You got Luostarinen with Anton Lundell and Maki Samoskevich. You got Boqvist, Noshik, and Greer. And on the blue line, you've got Forsling and Ekblad, Mikula and Kulikov, Schmidt and Balinskis, and then one of either Spencer Knight or Sergei Bobrovsky will make the start in this one. I believe we've seen Knight played the last game against Washington. That was a 4-1 loss, so perhaps they do go back to Sergei Bobrovsky for this one. Would make sense against a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, whom he's had quite a bit of success against in the past.
Yeah, that's going to be the real question. It wouldn't surprise me if they go back to Bobrovsky just because Spencer Knight, as you noted, hasn't he hasn't won a chance for another start, in my opinion. But they're just not getting good goaltending all around.
No,
right now.
No.
Like through this, as you mentioned, through this, like you lose 7-4 to the Avalanche, which I know they're a good team. They're also a team that hasn't played well, and like Maurice, I think I don't know if it was the last game or one of the last games, dropped like 15 F-bombs.
Yeah, in the last game, yeah. Within a minute, apparently dropped 15 F-bombs in a minute. Classic bro.
Yeah, it's just kind of strange where things have gone with this team, and like at goaltending especially, because like I've always found that whole, they spent so much money on the two goaltenders. And you look at the rest of the roster, and it's like, are you going to have to figure out a way to, after last year, I know Spencer Knight didn't play that much last year because of what he was going through. Do you consider having to move one, like, obviously it'd probably be Spencer Knight, because I don't think you're moving that Sergei Bobrovsky contract.
You don't think?
That's a tough contract to move. Like, he's
how many more years does he have left on that deal, though? Like, I mean, if he can find the thing with Bobrovsky is like, there's probably teams out there, again, a conversation for another day.
He's got one more year after this year. So,
dude, that's movable. There's going to be a team out there that looks at him and says, hey, if he gets hot in May and June, he can bring a team to the promised land. He's done that in back-to-back years.
That's also a getting older contract. Too. 30, he'll be 37 next year.
I know.
So the good thing, and I'll mention this too. It's a $10 million cap hit. It does have the full I think it's no trade, but the total salary is $6 million next year.
There you go. So, but anyways, I don't know if Florida's in the mood to be moving off of Bobrovsky, but either way, I think that you look at that Panthers team, and where I think it lacks compared to other years is the blue line, and we've talked about that a little bit already today. Like it gets pretty thin pretty quick, right, on that blue line. Like you went from having a pretty good top four to, okay, we got a good top pair in Ekblad and Forsling, and then it kind of drops off pretty drastically at that point, right? So that's the one thing that you're worried about too. So when you got an aging goaltending who's not playing well with a less than stellar defense behind it, it's not going to turn out so well. So we'll see what ends up happening with the Panthers down the line. But again, Toronto can't underestimate them. Nope. You know that they're gonna give it their all, and they're a scrappy bunch.
Very scrappy.
Okay, before we log out, before we get out of here for the day, I wanted to have a quick conversation about what was said on Overdrive a couple of days ago, and it seems to really be, striking a chord, setting the hockey world ablaze. And they were talking about Sidney Crosby. If things continue to go south in Pittsburgh, like, why would he stick around? And if Crosby were to hit the market where the Penguins are entertaining a move, where Crosby's entertaining a move, should the Maple Leafs get involved in the sweepstakes. I mean, they should. Like, let's be
Yes.
honest. For sure, they should. The question is, like, what would that even take? What would that look like? Like, if they could pull it off, I mean, hell, dude, you're looking at like for this year. We'll just take a look at this season face value. Matthews, Crosby, Tavares down the middle. Like, you're not going to get better than that in the NHL.
It's like got the choir singing hallelujah, right?
Like that would be unbelievable. But what would it take? And that's where things go south with this. Like, what would a realistic trade package have to look like, you think, for both sides to, come to some sort of agreement and make this trade in good faith? Like,
assuming that Kyle Dubas doesn't get thrown out of Pittsburgh for the rest of his life, for even considering trading Sidney Crosby, like you're looking at
should be a parting gift. He knows he's gonna get fired anyway. Whatever. I'll trade Crosby.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you sure you want to fire me before you get fired? I'm gonna trade your franchise, your top best player. Well, it's him and Lemieux, pretty much like back and back. But you're like any deal, you already know he's looking at Easton Cowan. 1,000%. There's no way he's doing a deal without Easton Cowan being on the table, and that's not even getting close. And that's just getting you to the table to say, all right, let's see what else we can come to, right? Like this Pittsburgh team picks, like they'll want picks, but they're going to want more than picks, right? Kyle Dubas is one of those guys that is going to also want players that can help him now.
A roster player of some kind.
A goalie
of some kind, probably, because Tristan Jarry ain't it, brother.
Yeah, they need a goalie.
So they can ask for Wall. They can ask for Hildeby.
Oh, yeah. He's asking for one of those goalies for sure. He probably would ask for Wall just because.
Yeah, he'd probably ask, and that'd be a quick no. Like Hildeby probably would be a guy who I think could be involved in those talks.
Yep.
I don't think they would. I don't believe they would. I mean, it would depend. Like, obviously, if it's Wall straight up, okay. But if it's like, yeah, I want a couple first round picks, Cowan, Wall, now it's getting out of hand. Yeah. But if it's like, oh, we want a goalie and a first round pick, and I don't know, it's like another decent prospect, like maybe you could think about moving Wall. But that's a pretty significant piece for Toronto right now, especially, with Crosby aging, let's be honest. And he's still going to be good. Pretty team-friendly contract, actually, for the next 2 years. But it's just tough to find a deal that makes sense, realistically.
It's just like the Leafs don't have those, these, like, the assets where you go, they could definitely part with these, and it'll make sense. Like, the Leafs, because they don't have many, they don't even have a first-round pick this year, because Kyle Dubas traded that one away. Like if you're looking, they don't have like a blue chip top. Like we're still dealing with draft picks he traded away, for God's sakes. They don't have like that. Obviously Wes Clark will look at players that he drafted and say, okay, I could pick a few guys, but like Pittsburgh,
Cowan, I think they'd ask for Cowan. Like, Cowan, I think is.
There's no way they're not doing that deal without Cowan.
Yeah, so like there's your grade A prospect.
Yeah.
So like Cowan's in the deal. I guess you'd have to give up at least the first round pick. So if you don't have one this year, next year's first round pick, Easton Cowan, and then there's probably 2 more pieces you're gonna have to give up on top of that.
Minimum,
right?
For sure.
And then it's okay. Well, how much money are we retaining? Because if that's the case, then one of those other 2 pieces are going to be even more significant. Is it another first round pick on top of that? Right. And then at that point, it's like, okay, and then we want Hildeby and maybe, another guy. Right. Like it would take a lot.
It would Sidney take a Crosby, lot,
but it's Crosby.
Like, first off, imagining Sidney Crosby in any jersey, not Pittsburgh, like any hockey fan will just be like, what are we
Let me ask you this though. Like, assuming that the trade that they make for a Crosby, hypothetically, doesn't really detract from their main roster a whole lot, does this instantly make the Leafs like top contenders? Like, does this make them cup favorites? You add Crosby to this roster? Are they instantly cup favorites?
I would think so. Like, who would have, especially if you keep as much of that roster intact, like who would have that's like when Pittsburgh had Crosby, Malkin, and Jordan Staal, like 3 legit top centers you have to go through, right? Even Jordan Staal, nobody really knew what Jordan Staal was until like those playoff runs. Like
we're talking like, two cups back to back.
Yeah,
lost one, won one.
So like you're looking at like that's where you win all these playoff series, because like Craig Berube would just be, all right, Matthews, you're going now. Hey, Sid, your turn. Hey, Johnny, your turn. Like, and your team's just like, okay, we took care of Matthews. Now we got to take care of Crosby. Now we got to take care of Tavares. Like, it just gets when you go through that. That's where games are like when we were talking about lines yesterday. Like we had that talk about the HBK line, and like that line feasted because teams like, all right, we got Sid. We got Malcolm. Oh, now we got this like third line that just came out of nowhere and became a cult classic in the playoffs. But like, that's what it takes. It takes just you're throwing all these different things at teams that they're just like, we can't deal with this.
Right? Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like fully healthy. Think about the players that come back and whatnot, and we could be looking at a third line of like Nyes, Tavares, Pacioretty as a third line, like, and that's because we got McMahon. We'll say McMahon.
You can even have McMahon, Tavares, and Pacioretty, and that as a third line would be holy.
Exactly. You can have whatever Nyes, Matthews, Nylander, and then
because you're trading Nick Robertson to the Penguins anyways. You're trading him back to his gym.
True. There you go. Exactly. Oh, Domi was the other player I was thinking. I'm like, who the hell? Who's their other like top 6 possible player? You'd put Domi with Crosby and
here's the thing about
whoever
Crosby.
You want to do it, but yeah,
like, if you're a team trading for Crosby, Sidney Crosby has made ordinary players look really good.
Yeah,
Connor Sheary only has a job in the NHL right now because of Sidney Crosby.
Dude, how much money did he make Chris Kunitz and Pascal Dupuis?
Oh,
how much money?
God.
A stupid amount of money.
Like, that's why Sidney Crosby is one of those rare players that doesn't matter who you play. They never needed to worry about who Sid was playing with. He made them so great.
Yeah. No, you're right. But you put him in the heart of this Maple Leafs lineup, buddy. And it's not just this year. It'd be, it's this year plus 2 more at only $8 million cap hit, 8.7. So it's not a terrible, in theory, it's obviously a really, really solid, thing to think of, like to try and dream up. But it's obviously incredibly difficult just cap wise to even find something, to make it happen. They don't have a lot of assets. And even
Crosby's got to prove it. And I just don't see, unless it just gets so bad where he feels like being on on Pittsburgh is just not worth, like it was almost like
pretty close, but the worst team in the league.
Yeah, they are the worst team in the league. Like they've given up, they've literally allowed the most goals in the NHL.
They're 7-12-4 with a .391 win percentage, which is okay. So they're 31st in the league. Chicago has technically a better record, has a worse record because I think they played one more game.
It's just that like Crosby's gonna have to make the determination of whether it's worth it to stick with it. But
dash 34 through 23 games. That's brutal.
He's had like it's sad seeing what he's had to do to even try to make Pittsburgh competitive.
Like that's 12 worse than Montreal, who stink.
I know.
Goal differentials. So
this is what happens when you great. You went on these runs and things like that, but
you'll take it. Come on, it's I'll take those back-to-back cups.
Yes.
In the mid-teens.
1,000%.
10 years later, it finally falls off. I'll take that any day.
Yeah, the problem was trying to hold on to it. That was like
you always do, and Chicago did the same thing. Yeah, right.
Just that Carlson trade. It's the one where I look at him just like didn't need to do that, man.
Did not need to. Yeah,
re-signing Tristan Jarry.
Well, also, it also made no sense where they were like, yeah, we still want to be competitive next year for Sid, but we're going to trade away Jake Gensel. Why don't you try extending Jake Gensel, make him part of your program moving forward if you want to win a Stanley Cup? He's a pretty good player.
That was one of those trades too where Crosby just like where he really like when people were starting to ask about his futures or like trades like that, he was like not even willing to discuss that. But it's just one of those things like too many, like the Jari move. I remain adamant that was the stupidest thing Dubas has ever done. Ever. Like he's done some pretty gnarly things. That might be the stupidest one he's done.
Well, is that coupled with the Ryan Graves signing? Like just both of those deals on the same day.
He went. They
gave Jari too much money. He
had so much cap space because Crosby, Malkin, and Letang all took hometown discounts. This is the problem with hometown discounts when you have a GM that doesn't know how to do it properly and get the right players and spend the money wisely.
Are you saying that happened in Toronto?
No, it didn't happen in Toronto, but this is like, remember when people were complaining that
it doesn't matter
hometown discounts? It doesn't matter if you don't use the money wisely, people.
Yeah, true. Very, very true. Yeah, fair point. Fair point. Yeah. Well, I doubt this trade happens, but it is a fun hypothetical to think of. And if it were to ever come to fruition in the next couple of years, and Sidney Crosby wears the blue and white playing for, the mecca of hockey in Toronto. Oh my God, this would just set the city ablaze.
Set the city ablaze, and everyone would hate it. Everyone around the league would hate it. I would just embrace, feed the hate.
31 fan bases. 31 fan bases will petition to the league to veto the trade, like Chris Paul style. Remember when the Chris Paul trade got vetoed to the Lakers back in the day? Yeah, there'll be a petition for the exact same thing in the NHL if Crosby got
collusion.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the legal cry. That's what they'll cry for. All right, buddy. Good stuff. We'll leave it there. That'll do it for us today on the podcast. I'd thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You could subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow to recap tonight's Leafs Panthers game at 7:30. Puck drop at 7:30. Just a reminder, go Leafs, go. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.